My job is to routinely help businesses solve complicated legal and business challenges, and I find this area of law uniquely challenging, and we have to appreciate that you've got a team of folks here who have really immersed themselves in the law, the regulations, the rules, the rulings that are coming out, and are available to help clients solve these challenges. We're gonna take this to as practical a level now as we can. We're gonna skip over the questions that were pre-packaged questions that are on page 22 of your outline, and we're going to go directly to take questions from you in the audience first, to the extent you have them, so we don't run out of time on those. And then if you don't fill up the next 20 or so minutes up until 10 o'clock with your questions, then we'll go back and start answering the questions that we had laid out as sample questions. So we've got a team of roving microphones, and we would like to try to start solving real-life problems that you all might have, to the extent we can here right now. Oh, okay. In the purple.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first one is, if you're operating in multiple states and you're self-insured, do those state laws for dependency, are those still in place? And
yes, a number of states do have, their own dependent extended coverage requirements. For example, Iowa has one, and Congress was well aware that multiple states had various dependent coverage requirements, and that's one of the reasons that both the statute and the regulations say that to the extent that states provide more coverage for the dependents, that the state law will apply and not be preempted by PPACA. Now, to answer your specific question on the self-funded part, that's going to depend on what the state is. So we'd want to look at both the state statute and then any regulations that the state administrative body would have made to determine whether or not those laws would still apply to you. And without knowing, the exact provisions of your plan, and then of course the states that you're in, it's hard to say. But that'd be kind of the analysis that we would go through. Yeah, it may or may not.
Any other additions to those comments?
And some states have gotten really talented at disguising their state laws as regard to dependent age. I mean, you're preempted if it's a state insurance law, quote unquote. And there are a couple states that have gotten very crafty and said, this is really an insurance law, it's for this or that, and therefore ERISA didn't preempt it. I know of one state, which we won't get into, but has done that, but that kind of in the background.
And then, Tony, I have one other question for you. In your scenario where you increased the employee rates in exchange for raising the employee premiums,
right?
Can you make a one-time bonus payment instead of increasing pay rates to keep away from the compounding effect of raising the pay rate?
You certainly could do that. Instead of giving everybody $1,800 every year, say here's X amount, and that's going to be it, because a lot of times people, if they have COLA situations, add 2% on the 2%, and it does have that compounding effect. You can certainly do that. You can be as creative or as uncreative as you want in this. The whole point being, if you're considering getting rid of the plan, we're just saying there's an alternative, and that's passing more of the cost on to the employees, and at the end of the day, saving the employer, not only employer money, but maybe saving face to say, yeah, we do have a plan, and it doesn't act as such a disincentive as recruitment and retention.
Anyone else? In the purple again.
I have a question on the dropping the insurance option. If you have $500,000 in wages that used to be pre-tax and neither the employer or employee was paying Social Security and Medicare on it, now you flip that over and it's taxable wages, and then you give an increase in wages of another $500,000, don't most of your savings go away in Social Security and Medicare tax?
Some of them, the question, make sure you heard it, was if you're flipping wages and you have pre-tax situations, the employer loses FICA. It certainly does. There is some issue to say not everybody is subject to FICA all the way to the top depending on how much they make. I didn't put that in there, although it's certainly in the back of my mind. I didn't want to complicate it too much, but you do have to think about that. There's also some situations, depending on what state you're in, both SUTA and FUTA wages as far as the pre-taxing goes. So it is a payroll nightmare. I think the general consensus is, though, still you can save more money with retaining the plan versus getting rid of it, but it's a good point.
Up here in the, on the aisle.
I just wanted to know if the full-time definition has been put out there yet.
Has the full-time definition been identified yet?
Early on, when we spoke in April, there are illusions in PAPICA to 30 hours per week being full-time status. I haven't seen anything definitive that's come out either in a revenue ruling or any other clarification in the regulations that is truly going to be the definition of full-time employee, but they do allude to that. And in my opinion, it's just an opinion, and that's a bad thing. You would hate to see the employer lose the flexibility of defining what a full-time employee is, whether that's 40 or 36 or 30 or whatever it might be. But there is some reference to that 30 hours.
Yes, sir.
If you remove the retirees from your plan, separate them out, are you still eligible for the early retiree subsidy for that group of employees?
The question is, if you remove the retirees and create a separate plan for the retirees only, so that plan is not subject to PPACA, is that plan still eligible for the early retiree reimbursement program? And all indications are, yes, it is. It still qualifies for the reimbursement program.
Could you speak to the definition of eligible employer-sponsored health plan under IRC's 5000A?
If you'll give me 1 minute, I'll try to find it for you. Look it up because it's very buried down there. So why don't we take another question, we'll come back to that.
We determined that we're a non-grandfathered plan right now, and we have maybe 1 or 2 employees who are under age 26, and they have their own single plan, but their parents work for us. One has a family plan, the other one has an employee spouse plan. So under these new rules, can they keep their single plan? Do we have to move them under their parents' plan? Is it our choice? That's the question.
What, you will have to offer the coverage. It's going to be the dependent who makes the decision whether they want the coverage, but it has to be made available to them. So your plan is going to have to provide the ability to obtain that coverage. Yes.
They already have single coverage.
Yes, I realize they already have signal coverage. Your plan will have to provide that they could elect coverage under your plan.
Under the family?
If they want to, under the parent's plan.
Okay.
And then they make a decision, do we want to continue single coverage? Do we want to continue coverage under the spousal plan? Don't know.
It's their choice.
It's the dependent who's going to make that coverage. Not coverage, make that decision, I'm sorry.
If we can go back to the question on the definition of eligible employer-sponsored plan, it's kind of a long definition, so I'll just read it to you. The code reference is section 5000 and then a capital A, then parentheses, lowercase f, and then in parentheses, so it's pretty easy to find if you just Google it, and then a 2 after that. So the term eligible employer-sponsored plan means, with respect to any employee, a group health plan or group health insurance coverage offered by an employer to the employee, which is a governmental plan as defined in the Public Health Service Act, or any other plan or coverage offered in the small or large group market within a state. Such terms shall include a grandfathered health plan described in another section of the Internal Revenue Code offered in a group market. And so when we go to apply the rules for dependent coverage, we need to make sure that the plan that the child's employer is providing would fall within that definition. So they'd either be a plan within the Public Health Service Act or within the other, or be it a plan or coverage offered in the small or large group market within a state. So there are ways to verify that the child is getting that type of coverage through their employer. It's just going to take a little bit of work on behalf of the plan to make sure that someone is out there verifying or certifying that, yes, the plan that the adult child has meets that definition. And of course, not very many people are going to know what that definition is, so that creates another communication challenge that will have to be addressed, is that this is the definition, this is potentially how you meet it.
Good. Any more questions from the floor? Do you want to maybe cherry pick a question or two out of the pre-selected questions that you think would be best to address, since we're not going to get to all of them?
While we're deciding what to cherry pick, I was asked a question just outside in the hallway before the seminar started that I didn't know if we would or wouldn't get to, so I'll try to address it now, and I don't have the exact citation. I just remember that it's section 4800 under PAPICA, but I can't remember the subsection. But the question was related to whether or not there were any exemptions being offered for the individual mandate to purchase coverage. And it is section 4800. I can't remember exactly what it is, but there is one exemption provided. It hasn't got a lot of press, but it's a religious exemption for those who can claim and prove, and I don't know what that process will be, that they have, but the purchase of individual health insurance or health insurance in general will violate the principles of their religion. They are exempt from the provisions of PAPICA. So it does exist out there, but there's no detail on it. I can't even remember who asked that, but somebody did.
Yes, sir.
I was wondering, you guys have done a great job of not being political, but a political question is, if in the election here in a couple of weeks, there's a material change in the makeup of the House or Senate, or the Republicans take over one or the other, what impact do you think that will have on the implementation of this new law?
I'll repeat the question. If in the November elections there's a material change in the House and or Senate, particularly with Republicans regaining control, what impact might that have on health care reform?
I just happen to have the microphone, but I'll pass it down. I'll just make one brief comment. Whether or not that does or doesn't happen, the question we get once in a while is, will health care reform just go away? And now we're just talking about personal beliefs. I don't think it will. I think in its purest form, and I don't say this as a bad thing or a good thing, but it, like Social Security, like Medicare, like Medicaid, health care reform is probably an entitlement program, and very few politicians get reelected or run on a platform of taking away entitlements. So I think that the best or worst case scenario, depending on how you look at it, with a changed Congress might be that the funding could be reduced, the funding could be changed. It's a worst case scenario, it could become an unfunded state mandate, much like No Child Left Behind, and then we're stuck just in a different kind of a scenario. But I'd be interested in my fellow panelists' opinions.
I think major changes will be difficult. I would assume that President Obama would veto any major changes to the legislation. It'd be fairly difficult to overcome a presidential veto. And as the law becomes rolled out and implemented and people actually start seeing some of the benefits for it, for example, having their children continue to receive coverage after they graduate from college, as an example, and people are actually getting a benefit from that, that makes it more politically difficult to overturn or repeal or replace the legislation. So I think given that, President Obama spent so much political capital to begin with getting it passed, it'd be very difficult to overcome a presidential veto. That being said, we might see some changes to the 1099 reporting requirements. That could be coming down the road. That'd be, I guess, my guess. I don't know if Dan has anything to add.
Any more questions from the floor?
We have one thing we want to add, Bob.
Yeah, and this just, I think it was late last week, came out at Wednesday, and most of you have probably seen this, but the requirement next year, there was a requirement that the value of your health insurance premiums would be put on employees' W-2s in 2011. That was now made optional, so I guess if you really want to, you could still do it next year, but that announcement just came out that would be an optional feature in 2011 at least. So I guess back to comments of will things be delayed or altered? I mean, that could be the case, so that you do not have to do that now next year, whether you're insured or self-insured.
I think that answers the question that we had put at the top of page 23 in the top box. Why don't we try to knock off those next two real quick, too, or any variations of those. When do we have to change our waiting period for eligibility for new employees to make sure it complies with the no greater than 90-day requirement?
The change for this is effective January 1, for plan years beginning on and after January 1, 2014.
And the next one is real specific. I have 2 restaurants with a total of 40 employees. One manager works full-time and is salaried. 4 shift leaders work approximately 37 hours a week. Will I have to supply health insurance for my staff?
Everybody heard that question 4. The 2 restaurants, I guess I would have to read into some things here, but I'm gonna make the assumption that the 2 restaurants are, part of the same common control group, and that we're not talking about 2 separate entities. But we have a full-timer, and we have salaried for that, and then 4 shift leaders that are working on a weekly basis or 37 hours. Do I have to supply? It's a tough question because there's no mandate in PAPICA that says employers have to offer health care plans. You don't have to offer a plan, because if you don't, then you just incur the penalty, as I mentioned before, the sledgehammer penalty. Now, you may want to offer one, or you may want to continue to for the same reasons I suggested before, but, the blunt answer is no, you don't have to. But there will be an individual mandate for each and every one of these people to go out and get insurance by 2014.
Thanks, Tony. Any more questions from the floor? If not, I'm going to wrap it up.